A war-worn veteran used hand signs to warn an alpha. "Help me. He has a blade." What happened next? The autumn wind swept through the cobblestone streets of Fort Providence, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The marketplace bustled with activity as merchants called out their wares, their voices blending into a cacophony of commerce and daily life. Among the crowd, a solitary figure moved with deliberate caution, his weathered cloak pulled tight against the chill. His name was Kyle, though few in this town knew it, and fewer still cared to learn it. Kyle had seen 30 winters, though his eyes held the weight of twice that many years. The war in the Northern Territories had taken much from him, his voice, his innocence, and nearly his life. A blade to the throat during an ambush had severed his ability to speak, leaving him with only his hands to communicate in a world that rarely had patience for silence. He had returned to civilian life 2 years prior, drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs where he could find them. Fort Providence was just another stop on an endless road, a place where he hoped to earn enough coin to survive another season. The veteran carried a small sack of grain he had just purchased, his payment for 3 days of labor at the mill. His fingers were calloused and scarred, testament to years of gripping sword hilts and now grinding wheels and heavy sacks. As he navigated through the crowd, his trained eyes, still sharp despite everything, scanned his surroundings with the instinct of a soldier who had learned that complacency meant death. Before we continue with Kale's story, if you're enjoying this tale of courage and survival, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's see what happens next. It was then that Kale noticed him. A man moving with purpose through the marketplace, his hand concealed beneath a dark cloak. The stranger's eyes were fixed on a figure ahead. Lord Thorn, the regional commander and protector of Fort Providence. Thorn was a tall man with graying hair and a bearing that commanded respect. He walked with 2 guards flanking him, but they were engaged in conversation, their attention divided. The Lord himself seemed relaxed, nodding to merchants and citizens as he passed. Kale's instincts screamed warning. He recognized the predatory focus in the cloaked man's eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his concealed hand gripped something beneath the fabric. The veteran had seen assassins before, had fought alongside and against them. This man was hunting, and Lord Thorn was his prey. Without hesitation, Kale dropped his sack of grain and pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. He needed to warn the Lord, but how? His voice was gone, stolen by war. Shouting was impossible. He could only use his hands, but would anyone understand? Would they react in time? As Kale closed the distance, he saw the assassin's hand emerge from beneath his cloak, fingers wrapped around the leather-bound hilt of a long dagger. The blade glinted in the afternoon sun, as the man quickened his pace, now only steps behind Lord Thorn. The guards remained oblivious, their attention still elsewhere. Kyle broke into a run, his boots pounding against the cobblestones. He positioned himself directly in Lord Thorn's line of sight, and began signing frantically, his hands moving with desperate precision. He pointed at the Lord, then at himself, then made the universal gesture for danger, a slashing motion across his throat. His fingers formed the shape of a blade, then pointed behind Thorn at the approaching assassin. Lord Thorn, to his credit, was a man who had survived his own share of battles. He recognized urgency when he saw it, even in silence. His eyes locked onto Kale's hands, watching the signs with intense concentration. The veteran's fingers spelled out the message again, slower this time, but no less urgent. "Help me. He has a blade." Understanding flashed across Thorn's face. In one fluid motion, the Lord spun around, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. The assassin, realizing his approach had been compromised, lunged forward with his dagger raised high. But Thorn was ready. He drew his blade with practiced speed, parrying the downward strike with a metallic clang that rang through the marketplace. The crowd erupted into chaos, people screaming and scattering in all directions. The 2 guards finally snapped to attention, drawing their weapons and moving to flank the assassin. But the attacker was skilled, dancing backward with the dagger still in hand, his eyes wild with desperation and determination. Kyle didn't hesitate. Years of military training overrode any sense of self-preservation. He rushed forward, tackling the assassin from the side just as the man prepared for another strike. They crashed to the ground together, rolling across the cobblestones in a tangle of limbs and cloaks. The dagger skittered away, clattering against the stones. The assassin was strong, fueled by fanatical purpose. He threw an elbow that connected with Cale's jaw, sending stars exploding across the veteran's vision. But Cale had endured worse pain than this. He wrapped his arms around the man, using his weight and training to pin him down. The guards arrived seconds later, hauling the assassin to his feet and binding his wrists with iron shackles. Lord Thorn stood over them, his sword still drawn, his chest heaving with exertion and adrenaline. He looked down at Cale, who was slowly rising to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. The Lord's expression was a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and respect. "You saved my life," Thorn said, his voice carrying authority even in the aftermath of violence. "What is your name?" Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it, the old frustration rising. He touched his throat and shook his head, then used his hands to spell out his name in the military sign language he had learned during the war. One of the guards, a younger man with keen eyes, stepped forward. "My lord, I recognize those signs. He's using military hand signals. His name is Cale." Thorn nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "You cannot speak." Cale shook his head in confirmation. "But you can hear and understand." Cale nodded. The Lord sheathed his sword and placed a hand on Cale's shoulder, a gesture of genuine gratitude. "Then hear this, Cale. You have my deepest thanks. That man would have killed me had you not intervened. Your warning, your courage, they saved my life today. I am in your debt." Kyle signed a response, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The young guard translated. "He says he only did what any soldier would do. He saw danger and acted." "Perhaps," Thorn replied, "but most soldiers are not here in this marketplace. Most would not have recognized the threat. Most would not have risked themselves for a stranger." He paused, studying Kyle with an appraising eye. "You have the bearing of a warrior. Where did you serve?" Kyle's hands moved again, spelling out his history. The guard translated. "Northern Territories, 3rd Infantry Division. 5 years of service. Honorably discharged after injury." Thorn's expression softened with understanding and respect. The Northern Territories campaign had been brutal, a grinding conflict that had consumed thousands of lives. Those who returned from it were changed, marked by experiences that civilians could never fully comprehend. "Then you know the cost of war," Thorn said quietly. "As do I." He glanced at the assassin, who was being dragged away by the guards, still struggling and shouting curses. This man is part of a larger threat. There are those who would see Fort Providence fall, who would destabilize this region for their own gain. I have enemies, Cale, and today you prevented one of them from succeeding. Cale nodded, understanding the political complexities that often lurked beneath such attacks. Assassinations were tools of power, weapons wielded by those too cowardly or too calculating to face their enemies openly. Lord Thorn made a decision then, one that would change both their lives. "I have a proposition for you, Cale. I need men I can trust, men with your skills and instincts. My personal guard could use someone with your experience. I offer you a position, not as a common soldier but as one of my trusted protectors. You would have quarters in the fortress, regular pay, and the respect your service deserves." Kyle stood silent, his mind racing. He had drifted for so long, taking temporary work, never staying anywhere long enough to form connections or put down roots. The idea of stability, of purpose, was both appealing and terrifying. But there was something in Lord Thorne's eyes, an honesty, a recognition of shared experience, that spoke to the part of Cale that still remembered what it meant to serve something greater than himself. He signed his response, and the guard translated. He accepts. He will serve with honor. A smile crossed Thorne's weathered face. Good. Report to the fortress at dawn tomorrow. We'll get you properly equipped and introduced to the rest of the guard. He extended his hand, and Cale clasped it firmly, sealing the agreement with a warrior's grip. As the crowd began to disperse and normalcy slowly returned to the marketplace, Cale retrieved his dropped sack of grain. His life had just taken an unexpected turn. He had come to Fort Providence seeking only survival. But now he had found something more. A purpose. A place. And perhaps, after all these years of silence and solitude, a chance to belong again. That night, Kyle sat in the small room he rented above a tavern, preparing for the next day. He cleaned and sharpened his old military knife, the only weapon he still possessed. He folded his few belongings, 2 spare shirts, a worn blanket, a small wooden carving of a horse his sister had made him before the war. Everything he owned fit into a single pack. As he worked, his mind wandered to the events of the day, the assassin's face, twisted with hatred and purpose, Lord Thorne's quick understanding and decisive action. The moment of connection when the Lord had recognized him not as a disabled beggar, but as a fellow warrior. It had been years since anyone had looked at Cale with that kind of respect. The war had taken his voice, but it had also taught him to communicate in other ways. His hands had become his words, his expressions his sentences. Most people lacked the patience to understand, dismissing him as simple or broken. But Thorne had listened, had seen past the silence to the man beneath. Cale lay down on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams. Tomorrow would mark a new beginning, a return to the structure and purpose of military life. He felt both anticipation and apprehension. Could he truly serve again? Could he function in a role that required constant communication when he had no voice? But then he remembered the young guard who had translated his signs, who had recognized the military hand language. Perhaps he would not be as isolated as he feared. Perhaps, in Lord Thorne's service, he would find others who understood, who could bridge the gap his injury had created. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Cale dreamed not of war and blood, but of standing watch on fortress walls, of purpose and belonging, of a future that held more than mere survival. Dawn broke cold and clear over Fort Providence. Cale rose with the sun, as he had done every day since his military training began over a decade ago. Some habits never died, no matter how far a soldier drifted from his former life. He dressed in his cleanest clothes, still worn and patched but respectable, and shouldered his pack. The tavern keeper nodded to him as he descended the stairs, and Kyle left a few coins on the counter for his final night's lodging. The fortress stood on the eastern edge of town, an imposing structure of gray stone that had guarded the region for over a century. Its walls rose 30 feet high, topped with crenellations where guards patrolled day and night. 2 massive towers flanked the main gate, and Cale could see archers positioned at intervals along the battlements. It was a serious fortification, built to withstand siege and assault. As Cale approached the gate, he was stopped by 2 sentries. Before he could begin signing, one of them, a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his left cheek, spoke up. "You the one Lord Thorne sent word about? The mute who stopped the assassin?" Kyle nodded, noting the directness of the description without taking offense. In military circles, bluntness was often preferred to polite euphemism. "Right, come with me. Lord's expecting you." The sentry led Cale through the gate and into the fortress courtyard. The space was bustling with activity, soldiers drilling in formation, blacksmiths hammering at anvils, stable hands tending to horses, servants carrying supplies. It was a self-contained community, organized and purposeful. Cale felt a familiar comfort in the structured chaos, the sense of ordered discipline that had defined his younger years. They crossed the courtyard and entered the main keep, climbing a spiral staircase to the second floor. The sentry knocked on a heavy wooden door, and Lord Thorne's voice called out permission to enter. The Lord's office was spacious but utilitarian, with maps covering the walls and a large oak desk dominating the center of the room. Thorne stood as they entered, dismissing the sentry with a nod of thanks. "Cale, good. You came." Thorne gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Cale sat, his posture straight despite the informal setting. Old habits of military bearing remained ingrained. Thorne settled into his own chair, studying Cale with the same appraising look from the previous day. "I've been thinking about how best to utilize your skills. Your inability to speak presents certain challenges, but your instincts and training are valuable. I've decided to assign you to my personal guard detail. You'll work directly with Captain Aldrich and his team. They're the men responsible for my safety and the security of this fortress." Cale nodded his understanding. "However," Thorne continued, "I want to ensure you can communicate effectively with the rest of the guard. To that end, I've arranged for you to work with Marcus, the young guard from yesterday who translated for you. He has experience with military hand signals and will help teach the others. It will take time, but I want my men to understand you without need for constant translation." Relief flooded through Kyle. The Lord had anticipated the very concern that had kept him awake the previous night. This was more than just offering him a job. Thorne was actively working to integrate him into the team, to ensure he could function effectively despite his disability. Cale placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head, a gesture of deep gratitude and respect. Thorne smiled. "I understand that sign, at least. Now, let's get you equipped and introduced to the captain." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Kyle was taken to the armory, where he was fitted with a leather brigandine, a vest reinforced with metal plates, and given a sword, dagger, and short bow with a quiver of arrows. The weapons felt good in his hands, familiar and right, in a way that millwork and manual labor never had. He was also given 2 sets of guard uniforms, dark blue tunics with the fortress insignia, sturdy trousers, and a heavy cloak for cold weather patrols. Captain Aldrich was a man in his early 40s, built like an oak tree and possessing a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Cale of his old commanding officers. He looked Cale up and down with a critical eye, then extended his hand. "Lord Thorne speaks highly of you, says you've got good instincts and a warrior's training. That's good enough for me, but you'll still need to prove yourself to the rest of the men. Understood?" Kyle shook the captain's hand and nodded firmly. "Marcus here will be your primary translator until the others learn your hand language. I expect you to pull your weight, disability or not. Can you do that?" Again, Cale nodded, this time with a slight smile. He appreciated the captain's directness. Aldrich wasn't coddling him or treating him as fragile. He was being held to the same standard as any other guard, which was exactly what Cale wanted. "Good. You'll start with night watch on the eastern wall. Marcus will accompany you for the first week. After that, we'll see how you integrate with the others." Dismissed. Cale was shown to his new quarters, a small but private room in the guards' barracks. It had a real bed, a chest for his belongings, a small table and chair, and a window overlooking the courtyard. Compared to the succession of rented rooms and temporary shelters he had occupied over the past 2 years, it felt like luxury. He unpacked his meager possessions, hanging his new uniforms on pegs and storing his weapons within easy reach. The wooden horse carving went on the small table, a reminder of home and family. His sister had died during the war, victim of a plague that swept through the civilian population while he fought in distant territories. He had returned to find her grave and an empty house. The carving was all he had left of her. That evening, Cale reported for his first watch. Marcus met him at the base of the eastern wall, carrying 2 torches and wearing a friendly smile. "Ready for your first night?" the young guard asked. Cale nodded, and they climbed the stone steps to the battlements. The sun was setting. painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. From this height, Cale could see the entire town of Fort Providence spread out below, smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys as families prepared evening meals. Beyond the town, fields and forests stretched to the horizon, darkening as night approached. "It's usually quiet," Marcus said as they began their patrol route. "We walk the eastern wall, checking for any signs of trouble. Every hour. We signal the other watch posts to confirm all is well. The real danger isn't usually direct assault. These walls are too strong for that. It's infiltration we watch for. Spies, saboteurs, assassins like the one you stopped yesterday." Kyle listened carefully, his eyes already scanning the approaches to the fortress, identifying potential routes an infiltrator might use. Marcus continued, "Lord Thorn has enemies. The Iron Wolves, a mercenary company, have been hired by rival lords to destabilize this region. They want to weaken Thorn's hold on Fort Providence, make it easier to seize control. That assassin yesterday was likely one of theirs." The name Iron Wolves stirred something in Cale's memory. He had heard of them during the war. Ruthless fighters who sold their services to the highest bidder, with no loyalty beyond gold. Dangerous men, skilled and without conscience. As they walked, Marcus taught Cale the watch protocols, the signal patterns, the rotation schedules, the procedures for raising alarm. Kyle absorbed it all, his military training making the information easy to retain and apply. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said after a while. "About what happened to your voice." Kyle had expected this question. He nodded, giving permission. "Was it in the Northern Territories?" Another nod. "I heard it was brutal up there. My older brother served in the 2nd Division. He didn't come back." Cale placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of shared understanding and sympathy. So many hadn't come back. So many families had been shattered by that conflict. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "It helps, knowing that others understand what it was like." They continued their patrol in companionable silence, two soldiers bound by the common experience of war and loss. As the night deepened and stars emerged in the clear sky, Cale felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of connection, of belonging to something larger than himself. The week passed quickly. Cale fell into the rhythm of guard duty with ease, his body and mind remembering the discipline and structure of military life. He worked different shifts: night watch, gate duty, patrols through the fortress grounds. Captain Aldrich observed him carefully, testing his reactions and instincts with unexpected drills and scenarios. True to Lord Thorn's word, Marcus began teaching the other guards basic hand signals. Some learned quickly, picking up the military signs with ease. Others struggled, frustrated by the need to learn what they saw as an unnecessary skill. But Captain Aldrich made it clear that understanding Cale's communication was not optional. It was a requirement for serving in the Lord's personal guard. Slowly, bridges of understanding formed. Cale found he could convey basic information, warnings, observations, questions, to most of the guards. More complex communication still required Marcus's translation, but the isolation he had feared never materialized. On his 8th day at the fortress, Cale was summoned to Lord Thorn's office. He climbed the familiar stairs, wondering what the Lord wanted. When he entered, he found Thorn standing at the window, looking out over the town. "Cale, thank you for coming." Thorn turned, his expression serious. "I have a task for you, one that requires discretion and your particular skills of observation." Cale waited, attentive. "The assassin we captured has been interrogated. Before he died, by his own hand, poison hidden in a false tooth, he revealed that the Iron Wolves have agents within Fort Providence. People we trust may be working against us, feeding information to our enemies. I need someone to watch, to observe without being obvious about it. Someone who can move through the fortress and town, seeing and hearing without the need to speak or draw attention." Understanding dawned on Cale. His silence, which had been such a burden, was now an asset. People often forgot he was there, or assumed he couldn't understand their conversations. He could observe without seeming threatening, could gather information without arousing suspicion. Cale signed his agreement, and Thorne nodded with satisfaction. Good. You'll continue your regular duties, but keep your eyes and ears open. Report anything suspicious to me directly. Marcus can translate when needed. Trust no one completely, not even the other guards. If there are traitors among us, they could be anywhere. This new responsibility weighed heavily on Cale, but he accepted it without hesitation. Lord Thorne had given him a second chance, a purpose and a place. He would repay that debt with loyalty and vigilance. Over the following weeks, Cale became a fixture in the fortress, present but unobtrusive. He watched and listened, noting patterns and anomalies. He observed which guards were always present when sensitive information was discussed, which servants had access to restricted areas, which merchants visited too frequently or asked too many questions. He noticed that one of the senior guards, a man named Garrett, often disappeared during his shifts, returning with weak excuses about checking perimeter defenses. He saw a kitchen servant passing notes to a merchant who had no legitimate business in the fortress. He observed a stable hand who paid too much attention to the comings and goings of Lord Thorne's personal horses. Cale reported each observation to Thorne, signing detailed descriptions while Marcus translated. The Lord listened carefully, building a picture of the network of spies and informants that had infiltrated his stronghold. "You've done excellent work," Thorne told him after one such report. "Thanks to your observations, we've identified at least 3 confirmed agents. But we can't move against them yet. If we arrest them now, we alert the Iron Wolves that we're aware of their network. We need to use this knowledge strategically, feed them false information, lead them into a trap." Cale understood the logic, though it frustrated him to watch traitors move freely through the fortress. Patience was part of warfare, whether on the battlefield or in the shadows of espionage. It was during this time that Cale met Alara, Lord Thorne's daughter. She was 23, with her father's strong features softened by her mother's grace. She had dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes that held both intelligence and compassion. She often visited the fortress from her residence in town, checking on her father and involving herself in the administration of the region. Their first meeting was by chance. Cale was standing watch outside Lord Thorne's office when Alara arrived for a meeting. She paused, studying him with open curiosity. "You're the one who saved my father," she said. It wasn't a question. Cale nodded, unsure how to respond to this direct attention. "He speaks highly of you, says you have the instincts of a true warrior and the loyalty of a trusted friend." She smiled, and Cale felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had thought long dead. "I wanted to thank you personally. My father is all I have left. If you hadn't acted that day..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Cale understood loss, understood the fear of losing those few precious connections that remained. He placed his hand over his heart and bowed slightly, the gesture conveying what words could not. Alara's smile widened. "Marcus has been teaching me some of your hand signs. I hope to learn more. It seems only right that I should be able to speak with the man who saved my father's life." Over the following weeks, Alara made good on her promise. She sought out Marcus for lessons, learning the military hand language with surprising speed. She would often stop to practice with Cale when their paths crossed in the fortress, signing simple greetings and questions, laughing at her own mistakes with good humor. Cale found himself looking forward to these encounters more than he cared to admit. Alara treated him not as a disabled veteran or a silent curiosity, but as a person worthy of effort and attention. She asked about his experiences, not the trauma of war, but the small details of his life, where he had grown up, what he enjoyed doing, what he thought of Fort Providence. He answered as best he could through signs and gestures, and she listened with genuine interest. Slowly, carefully, Something grew between them. A connection built on mutual respect and understanding, on the patience to communicate across the barrier of silence. Captain Aldrich noticed, of course. Little escaped the captain's attention. "The Lord's daughter has taken an interest in you," he observed one day during a training session. Cale's hands moved in response, and Aldrich, who had learned enough signs to manage basic conversation, understood. "She is kind." "She is," Aldrich agreed. "She's also the Lord's only child and heir to his position. Be careful, Cale. I don't doubt your intentions, but others might see opportunity where there is only friendship." The warning was clear, and Cale appreciated it. He had no illusions about his station or prospects. He was a disabled veteran, a guard with no voice and few prospects beyond his current position. Alara was nobility, destined for a political marriage that would strengthen alliances and secure the region's future. Whatever friendship existed between them could never be more than that. But knowing this didn't stop his heart from lifting when he saw her, didn't prevent the warmth that spread through his chest when she smiled at him, didn't diminish the value he placed on their conversations conducted in signs and gestures. 3 months after Cale joined the Guard, the situation with the Iron Wolves came to a head. Lord Thorne's strategy of feeding false information through the identified spies had worked. The mercenary company believed the fortress would be lightly defended on a specific night, with Lord Thorne away on a diplomatic mission to a neighboring region. In truth, Thorne would be in the fortress, and every guard would be on high alert, prepared for the assault they knew was coming. Cale was positioned on the eastern wall. The section intelligence suggested would be the primary point of attack. Beside him stood Marcus and 4 other guards, all armed and ready. Captain Aldrich commanded the defense, coordinating the various watch posts and reserve forces. The night was moonless, dark clouds obscuring even starlight. Perfect conditions for an attack. Kyle's every sense was heightened, his body thrumming with the familiar tension of pre-combat anticipation. He had not fought in over 2 years, but the instincts remained, honed by years of warfare. Midnight came and went. 1 hour passed, then 2. Some of the guards began to relax, wondering if the intelligence had been wrong. But Kyle remained alert. He knew how these operations worked. The waiting, the psychological warfare of delayed assault, the hope that defenders would lower their guard. It was nearly 3 a.m. when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the darkness beyond the wall, a shadow that moved with too much purpose to be natural. He touched Marcus's arm and signed rapidly. Movement, 50 yards, multiple contacts. Marcus relayed the message to the other guards, who immediately readied their weapons. Captain Aldrich was signaled, and the alarm was raised. Not the loud bells that would alert the attackers, but a series of quiet signals that brought every guard to full readiness. The Iron Wolves came in silence, using grappling hooks and rope ladders to scale the walls. They were professionals, moving with practiced efficiency, but they climbed into a prepared defense. As the first mercenary crested the battlements, Cale was there. His sword flashed in the darkness, striking with lethal precision. The man fell backward with a choked cry, tumbling from the wall. More came behind him, and suddenly the night erupted into violence. Cale fought with the skill and ferocity of his military years, his blade dancing in patterns drilled into muscle memory through countless hours of training. He couldn't shout warnings or battle cries, but his actions spoke louder than words. He was everywhere along the wall section, striking down attackers, protecting his fellow guards, holding the line. Marcus fought beside him, the two moving in coordinated patterns, covering each other's vulnerabilities. The other guards rallied around them, inspired by their determination and skill. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. The Iron Wolves were skilled, but they had walked into a trap. They faced not a skeleton crew of guards, but a fully prepared defense. More fortress soldiers poured onto the walls, overwhelming the attackers with superior numbers and position. Finally, a horn sounded from below, the mercenary signal for retreat. The surviving iron wolves disengaged, rappelling down the walls or fleeing through whatever routes they could find. The fortress guards let them go, content to have repelled the assault without pursuing into the darkness where ambush might await. As the adrenaline faded and the immediate danger passed, Cale took stock of the situation. Several guards were wounded, but none fatally. The fortress had held, and the iron wolves had been dealt a significant defeat. Bodies of mercenaries lay on the battlements and at the base of the walls, grim testament to the price of their failed assault. Captain Aldrich appeared, his sword bloody, his expression grim but satisfied. He clasped Cale's shoulder firmly. "You saw them first. Your warning gave us the crucial seconds we needed to prepare. Well done, soldier." The word soldier carried weight, a recognition of Cale's value and contribution. He nodded his acknowledgement, too exhausted for more elaborate response. Lord Thorn himself came to the walls as dawn broke, surveying the aftermath of the battle. He moved among the guards, checking on the wounded, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. When he reached Cale, he stopped, his expression grave. "Once again, you've proven your worth. Your vigilance prevented surprise, and your skill in combat helped hold the wall. I am grateful, Cale, and proud to have you in my service." Cale signed a response, and Marcus, standing nearby, translated. "He says he only did his duty. He's honored to serve." "The honor is mine," Thorn replied, "to have such men defending this fortress." In the aftermath of the battle, the identified spies within the fortress were quietly arrested. With the Iron Wolves' assault defeated and their network exposed, there was no longer any reason to maintain the pretense. The traitors were tried and punished according to military law, and new security measures were implemented to prevent future infiltration. The victory solidified Lord Thorn's position in the region and earned Fort Providence a reputation as a stronghold not to be trifled with. The Iron Wolves withdrew their contract, deeming the target too costly to pursue further. For Cale, life settled into a new rhythm. He continued his duties as part of the Lord's personal guard, his position now secure and respected. The other guards had seen him fight, had witnessed his skill and courage. Whatever doubts they might have harbored about his capabilities were erased by the reality of combat. His friendship with Alara deepened. She had been in the fortress during the attack, helping tend to the wounded in the aftermath. She had seen Cale return from the walls, blood-spattered and exhausted, and the relief in her eyes had been unmistakable. They spent more time together, often walking in the fortress gardens or sitting in quiet corners, communicating through the hand language she had worked so hard to learn. Cale found himself sharing things he had never told anyone. His memories of his sister, his struggles after losing his voice, his fears and hopes for the future. Alara, in turn, confided in him. She spoke of the pressures of being Lord Thorn's daughter, the expectations placed upon her, the political marriages her father's advisors constantly suggested. She valued Cale's perspective, his honest reactions unfiltered by political maneuvering or social ambition. "You see me," she signed one afternoon as they sat in the garden, the autumn sun warm on their faces. "Not the Lord's daughter, not a political asset. Just me." Cale signed back. "You are worth seeing." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Alara reached out, taking his scarred hand in hers. "I wish," she began, then stopped, shaking her head. "The world is complicated." Cale understood. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it, respecting the boundaries that society and circumstance imposed upon them. Winter came to Fort Providence, bringing snow and cold winds. The fortress became a place of warmth and community, guards and servants gathering around fires, sharing stories and meals. Cale found himself included in these gatherings, no longer an outsider, but a valued member of the fortress family. Marcus became his closest friend, the two spending their off-duty hours together, playing chess or practicing combat techniques. The young guard had a gift for languages and communication, and he helped Cale develop more nuanced signs for complex ideas, expanding his ability to express himself. Captain Aldrich promoted Cale to senior guard, a position of increased responsibility and respect. He was now involved in planning security protocols and training newer guards, his experience and instincts valued by the captain and Lord Thorn alike. One evening, as Cale stood watch on the walls, looking out over the snow-covered landscape, he reflected on how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been adrift, alone, surviving day to day with no purpose beyond basic existence. Now he had a home, friends, meaningful work, and, though he tried not to dwell on it too much, someone who cared for him in ways that went beyond friendship. He thought of the moment in the marketplace when he had seen the assassin, when he had made the split-second decision to intervene, despite having no voice to raise alarm. That choice had set everything else in motion, had led him to this moment, this place, this life. His hand moved unconsciously to his throat, touching the scar that marked where his voice had been taken. For years, he had seen this wound as nothing but loss, a disability that diminished him. But perhaps it had also taught him other ways to communicate, other ways to connect with people. Perhaps it had made him more observant, more attuned to nonverbal cues and unspoken emotions. Perhaps, in losing his voice, he had found something else, a different kind of strength, a different way of being in the world. Spring arrived with a burst of color and life. The fields around Fort Providence turned green, flowers bloomed in the fortress gardens, and the world seemed full of possibility and renewal. It was during this season that Lord Thorn called Cale to his office for a private meeting. When Cale entered, he found not only the Lord, but also Alara, sitting beside her father with an expression that mixed nervousness and determination. "Cale, please sit," Thorn said, gesturing to a chair. "We have something important to discuss with you." Cale sat, his mind racing through possibilities, none of which prepared him for what came next. "My daughter has made a request," Thorn began, "one that I have given considerable thought to over the past months. She has asked for my blessing to marry you." Cale's world tilted. He stared at Alara, who met his gaze steadily, her chin raised in defiance of convention and expectation. "I know what society expects," Thorn continued. "I know the political advantages of a strategic marriage alliance. But I also know the value of happiness, of genuine connection. I lost my wife 10 years ago, and I have spent every day since missing the partnership we shared. I will not force my daughter into a loveless marriage for political gain." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You have proven yourself, Cale. Your loyalty, your courage, your character. These are worth more than noble bloodlines or political connections. If Alara chooses you, and you choose her, you have my blessing." Cale's hands trembled as he signed, and Thorn, who had learned enough over the months to understand basic communication, read the gestures. "I am not worthy. She deserves better." "Let me decide what I deserve," Alara said firmly, her hands moving in the signs she had worked so hard to learn. "I choose you, Cale. Not because of what you can give me, but because of who you are. Because you see me, and I see you. Because when we're together, I feel understood in ways I never have before." Tears stung Kyle's eyes, the first he had shed since the war. He looked at this remarkable woman who had chosen him despite everything, who had learned his language, who had looked past his scars and silence to the man beneath. His hands moved, signing the words that his voice could never speak. "I love you. I choose you. Always." Alara's face broke into a radiant smile, and she crossed the room to embrace him. Cale held her, overwhelmed by gratitude and wonder, by the impossible gift of being chosen, of being loved. Lord Thorn watched with satisfaction, then cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose we have a wedding to plan." The wedding took place 2 months later, in the fortress chapel. It was a modest affair by noble standards, but rich in meaning and genuine celebration. The guards formed an honor guard, their swords raised in salute as Kyle and Alara emerged as husband and wife. Marcus served as Kyle's best man, standing beside his friend with pride and joy. Captain Aldrich gave a toast at the celebration that followed, his gruff voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I've served with many soldiers in my years, and I can say without hesitation that Kyle is among the finest. He has proven that true strength isn't measured in words spoken, but in actions taken. He has shown us all what it means to serve with honor, to fight with courage, and to love with an open heart. To Kale and Alara." The crowd raised their cups, echoing the toast, and Kale felt a fullness in his chest that threatened to overwhelm him. He looked around at the faces gathered to celebrate, guards he had fought beside, servants he had protected, friends he had made, and the woman he loved standing at his side. He had come to Fort Providence seeking only survival, expecting nothing more than temporary work and eventual departure. Instead, he had found a home, a purpose, and a future he had never dared to imagine. That night, as he and Alara stood on the fortress walls looking out over the moonlit landscape, she took his hand and signed a question. "Are you happy?" Kale turned to face her, his hands moving with absolute certainty. "More than I ever thought possible." She smiled and leaned against him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Kyle thought of all the moments that had led to this one, the war that had taken his voice, the years of drifting, the chance encounter in the marketplace, the split-second decision to intervene, the hand signs that had warned of danger and ultimately connected him to the people who would become his family. His silence, once a source of shame and isolation, had become a bridge rather than a barrier. It had taught him to listen more carefully, to observe more closely, to communicate with intention and precision. It had brought him to Alara, who had cared enough to learn his language, to meet him in the space between sound and silence. The months that followed were among the happiest of Kale's life. He and Alara made a home together in quarters within the fortress, a space that was theirs alone. She continued her work helping to administer the region, and he continued his duties with the guard. They developed their own rhythms and rituals, their own ways of communicating that went beyond even the hand language they shared. Kale found that marriage to Alara opened new doors of acceptance and respect. The townspeople who had once dismissed him as a disabled beggar now greeted him with respect as the Lord's son-in-law. Merchants sought his opinion, citizens asked for his help with various matters, and he found himself involved in the community in ways he had never experienced before. But more than the external changes, it was the internal transformation that mattered most. For the first time since losing his voice, Kyle felt whole. Not because Alara completed him. He had learned to be complete on his own. But because she saw his completeness and reflected it back to him. She never treated his silence as a lack, never made him feel less than fully human. A year after their wedding, Alara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Lyra, and from her first days, Kale communicated with her through touch and gesture. As she grew, she learned both spoken language from her mother and hand signs from her father, becoming fluent in both forms of communication. Watching his daughter grow, teaching her the signs that had become his voice, Kale felt a profound sense of purpose and continuity. His silence would not be a burden to her, but a gift, a second language, a bridge between different ways of being in the world. Lord Thorn delighted in his granddaughter, often taking her on walks through the fortress, telling her stories of her father's courage and service. The old lord's health was declining, and he knew his time was limited. But he faced the future with contentment, knowing his daughter was happy, and his legacy would continue. 2 years after Lyra's birth, Lord Thorn passed away peacefully in his sleep. The region mourned the loss of a wise and just leader, and Alara assumed her father's responsibilities, becoming Lady of Fort Providence. Kyle stood beside her as her partner and advisor, his insights and observations helping her navigate the complex political landscape. Captain Aldrich retired, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, Kyle was named as his replacement. The promotion came with significant responsibility, but also with the trust and respect of every guard in the fortress. They had fought beside him, had seen his capabilities, and they followed his leadership without hesitation. Kyle developed a system of visual signals and written orders that allowed him to command effectively, despite his inability to speak. His guards learned to read his gestures and expressions, to understand his intentions through the clarity of his communication. In many ways, his silence made him a better commander. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he assumed, and led by example rather than empty rhetoric. Years passed, and Fort Providence prospered under Alara's leadership and Kyle's protection. The fortress became known as a place of justice and opportunity, where people were valued for their character and contributions, rather than their circumstances or limitations. Marcus, now a senior guard himself, often joked that Kyle had the easiest job in the fortress. "You never have to waste breath on long speeches or explanations," he would sign with a grin. "The rest of us talk ourselves hoarse while you just point and everyone understands." Kyle would smile at these comments, appreciating the humor and the underlying acceptance. His silence was no longer remarkable or limiting. It was simply part of who he was, as natural and unremarkable as the color of his eyes, or the scars on his hands. On the 10th anniversary of the day he had saved Lord Thorn in the marketplace, Kyle stood once again on the eastern wall, looking out over the town and surrounding countryside. So much had changed since that autumn afternoon, when he had seen an assassin moving through the crowd and made the split-second decision to intervene. He thought of the young veteran he had been then, lost, alone, seeing his silence as nothing but disability and burden. He wished he could go back and tell that younger self what the future held, what possibilities existed beyond mere survival. But perhaps the journey had been necessary. Perhaps he had needed to walk through the darkness, to fully appreciate the light, needed to experience isolation, to truly value connection, needed to lose his voice to discover all the other ways of speaking and being heard. Lyra, now 9 years old, climbed the stairs to join him on the wall. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's observant eyes, and she moved with a confidence that spoke of being raised in love and security. "What are you thinking about, Papa?" She signed, her small hands forming the gestures with practiced ease. Kyle smiled and signed back. "About how lucky I am, about how one moment of courage can change everything." "But tell me again about the day you saved Grandfather," she signed, settling beside him on the wall. And so Kyle told the story once more, his hands painting pictures in the air, his daughter watching with rapt attention. He told of seeing the assassin, of the desperate warning signed in silence, of Lord Thorn's quick understanding and decisive action. He told of how that single moment had led to everything that followed. His position in the guard, his friendship with Marcus, his love for Alara, and ultimately, Lyra herself. "So if you hadn't been brave that day," Lyra signed thoughtfully, "I wouldn't exist." "Perhaps not," Kyle signed back. "Or perhaps you would exist in a different way, in a different life. But I am grateful for this life, for this moment, for you." Lyra hugged him fiercely, and Kyle held his daughter close, looking out over the fortress he had helped protect, the community he had become part of, the life he had built from the ashes of war and loss. His silence had once seemed like the end of everything, the death of his dreams, the destruction of his future, the final theft of a war that had already taken so much. But it had become, instead, a beginning, a different path, a different way of moving through the world, a different kind of strength. He had learned to speak without words, to communicate through gesture and expression, to connect with others across the barrier of silence. He had learned that being heard didn't require a voice, that being understood didn't require speech, that being valued didn't require conforming to others' expectations of normalcy. Most importantly, he had learned that disability was not destiny, that limitations could become strengths, that what seemed like endings could transform into beginnings. As the sun set over Fort Providence, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cale stood with his daughter on the walls he had defended, in the home he had found, surrounded by the life he had built. His hands rested gently on Lyra's shoulders, and he felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He had been a soldier, a veteran, a guard, a husband, a father, a commander. He had been broken and rebuilt, lost and found, silenced and heard. And through it all, he had learned the most important lesson of his life. That courage wasn't about being fearless or perfect or whole by others' standards. Courage was about showing up, about acting despite fear and limitation, about choosing connection over isolation, about believing that your contribution mattered even when the world suggested otherwise. That day in the marketplace, when he had dropped his sack of grain and run toward danger, when he had used his hands to spell out a desperate warning, when he had tackled an assassin to save a stranger's life, that had been courage. Not because he was fearless, but because he was terrified and acted anyway. Not because he was whole, but because he refused to let his brokenness define his worth. And from that single moment of courage, everything else had flowed. A position in the Guard, a purpose, friendships, love, family, home, a life worth living, worth fighting for, worth celebrating. Ilara joined them on the wall as the last light faded from the sky, slipping her hand into Cale's. The three of them stood together, a family bound by love and choice, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Kyle looked at his wife and daughter, at the fortress around them, at the peaceful town below, and he felt his heart swell with emotion too vast for words, even if he had possessed the voice to speak them. Some things, he had learned, were too big for words anyway. Some truths could only be expressed in the quiet language of presence and action, in the steady rhythm of showing up day after day, in the simple act of loving and being loved in return. His silence had taught him this. His scars had taught him this. His journey from broken soldier to respected commander, from isolated wanderer to beloved husband and father. All of it had taught him this fundamental truth, that worth wasn't measured in words spoken or abilities possessed, but in courage shown, in kindness given, in connections forged, in love shared. And as the night settled over Fort Providence, as the watchfires were lit along the walls and the town below glowed with the warm light of home and hearth, Cale knew with absolute certainty that he had found what every soldier, every wanderer, every broken soul searches for: a place to belong, a purpose to serve, and people to love who loved him in return. His hands moved in the darkness, signing words only Ilara could see. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me. For choosing me. For this life. Ilara squeezed his hand and signed back. Thank you for being brave enough to warn a stranger. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They stood together in the comfortable silence that had become their shared language, watching over the fortress and the town, guardians of peace and prosperity, partners in life and love. And in that moment, Cale understood that his story, the story of a war-worn veteran who used hand signs to warn an alpha, who saved a life and in doing so saved his own, was not a story about disability or limitation. It was a story about courage and connection, about the power of acting despite fear, about the possibility of transformation and redemption. It was a story about finding your voice, even in silence, about being heard, even without words, about being whole, even when broken, about being loved, even when you believe yourself unlovable. It was ultimately a story about hope, the hope that no matter how lost you are, no matter how broken you feel, no matter how impossible the future seems, there is always the possibility of change, of connection, of finding your way home. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage, one decision to act, one warning signed in desperate silence, one hand reaching across the gap between isolation and connection, between despair and hope, between the person you are and the person you might become. Cale had made that reach, had taken that chance, had signed that warning. And everything else, all the beauty and love and purpose that filled his life now, had flowed from that single moment of courage. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Cale held his family close and knew, with the certainty that comes from hard-won wisdom, that he was exactly where he was meant to be.